Tēnā tātou katoa, good evening. It's been 14 years in the making, but the long-awaited free trade agreement with the EU still needed some 11th-hour negotiations to get it across the line. After downplaying expectations at the start of her trip, early this morning in Brussels, Jacinda Ardern announced a deal had been struck just hours before flying out to London. She says it will help grow exports to Europe by $1.8 billion a year by 2035, with the vast majority of tariffs gone from day one. That means savings for the kiwi fruit industry of $37 million a year, fish and seafood $20 million a year, and wine $6 million. But not everyone's happy. Despite some concessions, our red meat sector is disappointed by its continued lack of access to the European market, calling it a missed opportunity. And kiwi feta and port makers have 9 years to rename their products. By 2031, only Greek-made feta and Portuguese port will be allowed to be sold under those names in New Zealand. Europe correspondent Lisette Raymer has more.
New Zealand, we have a deal, and the beaming faces of our closers tell the story. Celebration, pride, relief at finally getting it done, because they so very almost didn't.
We're talking hours before that announcement.
No, 5 minutes.
I can say that even right at the very end, we had the odd little issue here and there.
The President of the European Commission admitted they were
tough negotiations, but they made it. We're done.
It's not surprising, given the deal is a whopper tariff stopper. 97% of our existing trade will be without tariffs within 7 years, 91% from day one. Kiwi fruit, wine, onions, manuka honey, manufactured goods, almost all fish and seafood will step into a brave new world of free trading.
I am proud that we have now here a deal that represents $1.8 billion of export opportunities for New Zealand and access for markets that we previously did not have.
It's no secret dairy and beef were the deal delayers, and even with it done and quotas increased slightly, neither side is claiming the win.
It's probably fair to say that no one likes it, so we must have it about right.
A sprinkling of laughs for what was admittedly a slip of the tongue.
Yeah.
But New Zealand's red meat industry can't see the humour.
We were hoping for more than what we got. What we have got amounts to, frankly, 0.1% of the EU consumption.
How can you expect farmers to be happy in New Zealand if you are not?
It is our trade minister's obligation to never be satisfied.
Even the weather cannot dampen Jacinda Ardern's mood today. These negotiations have been happening for 4 years. The concept of an FTA between Europe and New Zealand was first brought up more than a decade ago.
With 28 countries in the mix, it was never going to be easy, and you don't get something for nothing. New Zealand has dropped all tariffs for Europe from day one. Plus, feta by any other name still tastes as salty, right?
We've got 9 years to prepare for those who produce feta to change the name and branding that they use for that product, but 9 years to do so. Parmesan, those who currently use it, can keep using it. The same for Gruyere.
A historic agreement for New Zealand and Europe at a historic time for the world.
Well, Lisette joins us now live from London. Lisette, how much did the current global situation play a part in getting this deal across the line?
Well, it definitely played a role, Sam. The President of the European Commission said as much. She said, at the moment, now more than ever, democracies need to stand up and stick together. The war in Ukraine, the Russian aggression, the mounting global food crisis have created a landscape where reliable friends are just so critical. To that point, Jacinda Ardern did make time yesterday to directly express New Zealand's solidarity to Ukraine, speaking on the phone to President Zelensky, during which he thanked New Zealand for our ongoing support and sanctions. Jacinda Ardern had actually been invited to visit Zelensky in person in Kiev on this trip. She wasn't able to make it work. It is just such a tight time schedule. She had to leave Brussels late last night and head straight here to London, where she has a meeting with the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson later today here at Downing Street. New Zealand and the UK already have an FTA, but this shiny new EU deal will actually have a greater impact on New Zealand's GDP.
Live from number 10 Downing Street, our Europe correspondent Lisette Raymer. Thanks, Lisette. Well, as Lisette mentioned, dairy and meat, which make up 40% of our annual goods exports, say the EU isn't walking its free trade talk.
While Kiwi feta makers need to start workshopping a new name. Isabel Ewing looks at the winners and losers from the free trade deal.
A long way from Brussels, local cheesemakers chewing over the implications of the new EU trade deal, like what to rename their feta.
It's very new, but my suggestion to Rich, my husband, was better, because it is.
There were fears the EU would block Kiwi cheesemakers from using names like Parmesan, Gouda, Brie and Camembert. But in the end, just the producers of feta and port will have to rebrand.
Our feta is made on a sustainable platform by people invested in making the best possible cheese. So if we have to call it something else, we have to call it something else. It's a beautiful cheese.
Bigger gripes than renaming products for the red meat sector. They say despite negotiators' best efforts, the result was frustratingly poor.
One of the team gave me a great analogy. He says, this is like going shopping at Christmas and you wanted to get an Xbox and what you've gone home with is a pair of socks.
The EU consumes 6.5 million tonnes of beef annually, and New Zealand farmers will now have access to 10,000 tonnes with a 7% tariff each year.
What would have been a great deal that countries that talk about environmental reprovisioning and talk about trade liberalisation actually walk the walk.
But trade experts say there is cause to celebrate.
We have to understand that the EU doesn't do free trade in a lot of agricultural products. It has a very strong farming lobby, and these are very delicate areas for the EU.
Onion growers among those delighted with the deal.
We export $55 million worth of onions to Europe every year, so this removal of the tariff of 10% on onions will be of significant value to us.
It's sweetened beekeepers up too.
Beekeepers are very happy to hear this news. We're at our national conference. We've got 800 delegates here, and it was a great thing to wake up to this morning.
It just means doing business with the EU has become a lot easier. And that's really important at a time when we're looking to diversify our trade away from China and to have a more balanced spread of exports.
The deal finally unravelling tariffs for many producers, while others hoping for greener pastures in other markets.
Kia ora, Isabel. About those greener pastures for our largest export sectors, how are they looking?
Well, Mike, not the greenest, unfortunately. Despite all the government's chat about diversifying our export markets from China, the options are in pretty short supply. India's FTA negotiations with New Zealand fell apart last year, and the other big one is the US. And while President Biden is a bit more into free trade than President Trump, he's still not a huge fan. If the states do decide to rejoin the CPTPP, that could open things up for our red meat and dairy sectors. But other than that, trade experts say we could look to African countries, maybe Bangladesh, as examples of big developing potential markets. But of course, that is looking pretty far into the future. But as for this deal, it has been signed in principle, and now it just needs to go through the parliamentary procedures here in New Zealand to then be ratified in 2024 and come into force.
Isabel Ewing live from Parliament, Tanakwe.